All right. Well, welcome to the April edition of the Lethbridge Photography Club. Just have one announcement about a field trip for next week that's being organized at LA Gallery. So LA Gallery is, and Laura Lee will send out an email with all these details, but just to give you a heads up, what we're going to be doing is we're going to LA Gallery, and Scott there has agreed to talk to us about printing and framing methods, different papers that we can print on. Before that, we're going to organize an informal meetup sort of the hour before downtown so people can take some photos and then go to LA Gallery after that, and maybe, if the light's good, maybe after that field trip too. But she'll send out some details probably either tomorrow or shortly. But that's next week, and it's on the 20th. Yeah, I just realized I missed that part, didn't I? It's Tuesday. It's on the 25th at 6:30 at LA Gallery downtown. It was at the top of the email, and I completely forgot. Okay. Are there any questions? I always start my lectures with, are there any questions? And so I guess I just do that naturally. Is there anything I've missed? If not, we are going to dive into our first of our Day in the Life shows. We're going to have 2 of them tonight because there was a lot of participation. Are we good, Doug? All right. Thank you. Yeah. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, always interesting to get some insight into our members' lives. I mean, we only see each other, once a month, and we only see really the photographer side of our lives. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, what we're going to have now is actually our educational segment. The theme for next month is called The Rule of Odds, and I volunteered to talk about it tonight. So, yeah, we're going to talk about the rule of odds. All right, so let's look at, next. So we're going to talk about what is it? It's taking photos of odd things, of all, right? Well, not really. Next. So, next one. The actual rule is taking photos of items in groups of odd numbers. So we see here, for example, we have a number of seashells, and so there's 5 of them here, and they're arranged in a particular. We'll talk about placement in a bit, but that's what we're actually talking about with rule of odds. All right, next. So, sorry, I breathed when I should have swallowed. So why does it actually work? What's the principles behind the rule of odds? Well, next. Nobody actually knows for sure. But there are some theories. Next. So one of the theories is that our minds group even-numbered things, but then leaves the odd numbers to stand by themselves. That our minds just try to organize. It's, I guess, part of our organizing chaos. So our minds will always try to separate an even number of things into 2 groups. So given any number of even things, our mind just naturally tries to do that. Next. Also, one of the theories is that with an even number of items in a photo, where are you supposed to focus? Are you supposed to focus on the left, on the right, in the middle? Our mind sort of gets stuck. One of the things, and sometimes we use this to an advantage, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but even numbers stabilizes a scene, whereas an odd number creates more dynamic scene. It creates that tension in the scene that we're often looking for in a photograph. And part of that is making the viewer's mind work harder. So because, if we immediately look at it and then, oh, okay, yeah, I kind of get it, it's an even number, it's not as exciting to us. But if our mind has to work harder to understand the image, the viewer gets drawn in more. And that's what's going on here. All right, next. So just to give you a little bit of practice with this, here are some even and some odd numbers. And I want you to just take a moment and look at them. So this A, B, and C, D. Which ones sort of attract you more? Or which ones pull you in more? So I'll just give you a moment to kind of look at that. So certainly for me, I find that, so B and C, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but certainly B and D, which have an odd number. Well, I guess D has an even number, sorry. But B and C, which do have odd numbers, pull us in more. If we look at A, our mind kind of divides it automatically in 2, and we have 2 sides of it. And again, we'll talk more about that a bit later. And we kind of get that with D, even though there's an even number, but having that ball in the middle kind of breaks it up a little bit. Okay, but one of the things we do see with C is it's 2, 3, 4. Sorry, I miscounted. It is 4, even though we have an even number in C. There's actually, because there's 2 groups there, and one of them is an odd number. The 2 groups are different odd numbers. That still pulls us in. Okay. All right. Next. So how do we go about using the rule of odds? So we'll start. I'll give you some examples. Next. So here's an example of using the rule of odds in food photography, where we have 1, 3, and 3. And so we have, yes, there's a little bit, there are kind of 3 in that, but in the first one with the tart, but really it's the 1 that we get focused on. When we look at the second one, again, we have 3 apples, but notice how they're also arranged in a triangle. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can use that a bit later. And then we also see that with the pears here. Again, having 3, a group of 3, but in this one, they're actually touching. Next. So this is examples using street photography, sort of on the street. So we see on the left there, the 3 people in the sunflowers. And on the right, again, the group of 3. What I do think is interesting is the middle one, because when we look at this, we may not immediately think that it's a group of, it's odds, but really, because there's quite a number of people in there, but there is 3 separate groups. There's the woman in the middle, who's contrasted in the black, and then we have our 2 groups on the side. Okay, next. And then this is ones from nature. So we have, for example, the flowers so we have 3, the 3 roses there, or we have our 3 giraffes there, or we have kind of almost descending layout, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we talk about how we align odd things with the mushrooms. So, all right, next. So how do we go about doing this? Well, the first thing to do is to look at what is the key elements for your photo. And what we want to look for is harmony, things that actually go together. So the elements should naturally go together. In this case, we have a cup of tea, so a teacup, a saucer, and a teaspoon. Next. But think about if that spoon was a screwdriver instead. Screwdriver doesn't quite go with tea. It doesn't quite go with that setting. Now, maybe that is what we want, but generally we're looking for things that go together. All right, next. So the next step is to look at, well, how are things grouped? And we can see, and there's 2 ways we can do this. One is that where items are actually touching each other, or where items are close to each other. So we see on the left here, we do have 4 items. So you could say it breaks the rule of odds, but really it's 3 groups, because we have on the extreme left there, the two of the items are touching each other. So we still get our groups. And if we look at the family on the right there, again, there's an even number of people in the photo, but we can see that there's 2 distinct groups. There's the children with the mother, and then there's the father there. And so we see that as odds. All right, next. All right, so the next step is, now that we've sort of defined what our groups are, the thing to look for now is, okay, what are the primary, make sure our primary objects have an odd number. So the primary, when we talk about the primary group, it's the big things in the photo. Here we have our the big things are these rocks in the foreground. The things in the back, yes, they're part of the photo, but they're not the center of the photo. And so we see we have these 3 prominent items here. So that's following our rule of odds. Next. Okay, well, what do you do if you don't actually have an odd number? Well, first thing we can do is remove them. Next. So if you have control over the scene, such as you're doing a still life or something where you can actually manipulate things, then remove items. So you might look at, for example, a vase full of flowers, and you look at it and you kind of go, okay, well, I really, there's an even number of the daisies. Okay, I'm going to take one of those daisies out so I can have my odd number of daisies. Okay, next. So what do we do if we can't actually control the scene like that, to physically remove objects? Well, we change our composition. So if we're talking about a landscape, we're looking at moving our feet. We're going to change where we're standing, or we're going to zoom in if we have a telephoto lens. And we're going to get it so that there are 3 primary elements, or I shouldn't say 3, an odd number of primary elements in our photo. If we're talking about wildlife, then we're going to have to wait. We could also move our feet or zoom, but wildlife might move, a little more unpredictable. So one of the things you might do is just wait till, for example, you have 2 birds on a branch. Well, you wait for one of them to leave. Or you wait for a third bird to enter the scene, and then you take your photo with your odds. And again, as I said, you can move your feet or zoom in if that's possible. But you can also do it in post-processing. When you get home, if you look at your photo and you're like, oh, well, I want to follow this rule of odds, and there's 4 things. If one of those things is at the edge or near the edge of your photo, you can use cropping to take out that to get your odd number. Or if you're good with Photoshop, I guess, you could actually duplicate items or remove an item, using content removal. Okay, next. So when we're looking at rule of odds, we want to look at there's different compositions that we can use, and one of them is we want to focus on this triangle. So here, for example, we have our rule of odds. We have 3 birds, but they form a triangle, and that's a whole other topic, is triangles versus straight lines. But this is one example where we might want to look at thinking about triangles, and triangles are naturally going to get you that rule of odds. Next. Other ones is looking at linear groups. So here, for example, we see on the left, we have our lions, and there's an odd number of lions, and they're all in a line. Or we have our 3 planes there, again, that are lined up. So we have these strong linear compositions. All right, next. So where does this rule work well? Well, with one element, that's our standard portrait, taking a photo of one person. All right, we're following our rule of odds because there's only one person. Or maybe it's one rock, or maybe it's one bird. 3 elements tends to be the better option if you can have it. Tends to make the stronger compositions, if you can, and that's what you've seen over and over again in a lot of these examples, is this 3s. So try aiming for groups of 3s. What that allows is that the items become distinct, but they don't overpower the photo. As opposed to when we get into, I'll get into 7 in a minute. If we were looking at sort of smaller items, I guess, or groups of items, things like flowers, bottles, rocks, that's where you're going to want, or seashells, as we saw earlier, that's where we're going to want to have 5. We're going to aim for our group of 5. Now, when we get to 7 or more elements, this is where it starts breaking down, because when we start to get to 7 or more elements in the photo, our mind naturally starts looking for patterns then, and it starts doing this grouping. So the more elements, sort of the less this rule of odds matters, and more other compositional rules start to take over. As noted there, the mind starts to struggle to actually separate these large number of objects, and our mind now shifts from looking at the individual items to looking more to patterns within the photo. All right, next. And of course, with any rule, ignore it. Sometimes it's not the right thing. And test out your composition. Look at, when you get home. Okay, I have these photos of birds. Some of them I have 4 birds in it. Some of them I have 3. What do I like more? Well, maybe in the photo with the 4 birds, there's more action, or it's more interesting. Maybe it's a mother with 3 babies. Okay, well, I have 4 in there, but the mother is feeding the birds. That's more interesting than just maybe the picture of the 3 birds sitting there. All right, next. One of the reasons we might want to ignore this is if our intent with the photo is something balanced or stable or symmetrical. So, for example, here we have 2 bridges. And it's a pretty strong photo because we're going for that symmetry in the photo. That's what we're looking for. That's what we want to communicate. So this is where we're going to see reflections where each side is the 2 elements act as reflections of each other within the photo. Okay, next. Maybe here, for example, so yes, there's 2 elements in the photo, but distance starts to break them up into groups, and now we have an odd number within each individual group. So here we have an odd number of sheep and an odd number of trees. So yes, there's even number, but because of that near far, that breaks it into the distance mix for those separate groupings. All right, next. And of course, you can't use it if you're talking about where it might be considered traditional duos. So for example, twin boys, right? That's actually my twin boys. You know, if you take a photo, I mean, putting a third one in there isn't going, well, I guess if it's triplets, but when you see twins, you expect twins. Or if you're photographing couples, like a wedding or engagement, right? We expect that there's going to be two or an even number within that photo. Okay, next. And then there's also times where it's just people know it's an even number of things. So for example, this is Mount Rushmore. If we wanted to go with the rule of odds, who do we cut out? Maybe Lincoln? I don't know, there's kind of a separation there. But people are going to look at that and go, well, wait a minute, it's a picture of Mount Rushmore. There's 4 heads. This doesn't look right. Okay, next. So what about the rule of thirds? So we have rule of odds and we have rule of thirds. And they both sound like they're about the same thing. And really, they're orthogonal, right? They're in two different dimensions. Rule of thirds is about placement within the photo, but it's not about the number of things in the photo. And that's where rule of odds comes in. Rule of odds is about how many things we have in the photo, whereas rule of thirds is about where are those items placed. Okay? And they can complement each other. So next. So for example, here on the left, we have 3 zebras. Okay, that's following the rule of odds. But this photo is not really following the rule of thirds, meaning that the prominent elements are not at those corners when we divide into the thirds, those lines of thirds. But then on the right there, there's an example of using the rule of odds, but also using the rule of thirds to have that space. So they are 2 different things. All right, next. And then, of course, the rule of odds can actually be about odd things. Coming back to my beginning, is sometimes what we're looking for is the odd man out, or one of these things is not like the others. So here, the odd one is the odd number. And we see in this photo that because there's one red apple and then there's a myriad, or well, maybe not quite a myriad, but lots of other green apples, it sticks out. And that, again, draws us into that photo. All right, next. All right, so this is just the references of where I found the information. And that's the rule of odds in, I don't know, 10 minutes or less, whatever it took. Are there questions or comments? So you're all experts now? Oh, yeah. Jeff.
Looking at a lot of the pictures, I know myself, I'm bad for it. I think when you're taking pictures, there's more than 3 in the group. You want to leave some space around that picture so that when it comes to cropping it, you can go to the 3-year.
Right. So the comment being that when you're taking the photo, one of the things you'll probably want to do so that you can use in the post-processing to get down to your rule of odds is leave some space around the edges. Or intentionally have it so that there's groups or places where you could cut out a bird or a deer or whatever it might be. Okay, yeah. Other comments or thoughts about rule of odds? Yeah, Bronny. Mm-hmm.
Storytelling, action, those kind of things. So when you were kind of renting the scale, where would you put?
So in all the things we try to do in the photo with composition and light and action and storytelling, where does the rule of odds fit in there? And I think like with any sort of rule or guideline, It depends on your intent. If you want my personal opinion, like I said, I gave the example of you have a mother bird and 3 birdlings. What are small birds called? Chicks. Okay. Sorry, my mind blanked on that one. All right. You have your 4, but what's more important to you in that moment is not following a rule of odds. It's the story, right? And I think story is probably trumps anything in a photo. But these are things to think about of how can I take my photography sort of a step better? And it's like, oh, well, okay, let's start looking at using this rule. Okay? Does that answer it? Okay.
Well, and also if your subjects are moving a bit, take pictures from different angles so that you can do different things with that photo.
Right. So again, coming back to how do we get the groupings, looking at with animals, move your feet, or in a landscape setting, again, move your feet. So maybe I'm thinking like the rocks on the beach. Well, from one angle, you might only have 2 because one is obscuring the other one. But if you move, now I have 3. Now I can see 3 in my photo. Yeah, it's a very good point. All right. Do you guys feel prepared for the theme next month? You're all going to start counting things. You go ahead and take photos and start counting in your viewfinder. All right. If nothing else. Oh. I hope you found it educational. All right. Next, we're going to look at favorite photos. So this is, again, a follow-up from last month where you were asked, or people were asked to submit a favorite photo from 2022.
John Anvik. My family went canoeing at Cameron Lake. I had just launched them and looked away for a moment when I heard a splash. Looking up, I see the 3 of them sitting in the water, having been broadsided by a wave and dumped out of the canoe. And I missed it. I quickly captured this after photo as it is perhaps the only time so far that we've tipped our canoe. Donna Kruger. Getting married is, without question, an important day in anyone's life. Being able to share it with both of your grandparents makes it more so, especially when they are still demonstrating their love after 67 years of marriage. The grandmother was the same age as the bride on her wedding day. I felt this picture showed the deep commitment and devotion that can only be achieved after facing life's challenges together for so long. Gail Shaw. I chose this photo as my favorite because it was my birthday. My son and his partner came out for the day to celebrate with me at our seasonal camping spot on the Waterton River. We all hung out around the fire pit roasting hot dogs and visiting. My great niece was camping with my husband and me that weekend also. John Crampel, Saw-Whet Owl. I searched for 4 months in the river bottom and finally found the saw-whet owl that I had heard was down there somewhere. I was walking through the thick bush and spotted tail feathers hanging down below a branch. He was at eye level and I moved around until I could photograph him. This particular photo was taken the second time I went to find him a month later. It was noon. I thought he would be sleeping, but no, he was awake and had just finished the head of this deer mouse. He was guarding the rest of it, quite proud of himself. Gail Crampel, George at Writing on Stone. This photo is special to me because this is my granddog George, and we were dog sitting. We took George several places over the years, but Writing on Stone was one of his favorites. He was like a goat climbing those hoodoos. My daughter recently had to euthanize George for severe heart problems. I love George, and this photo will remind me of the good times that we had together.
Thank you once again to everyone who submitted a photo. It's always, again, fun to hear the stories behind the photos that we take. Next on the agenda, we're going to have a Being There segment from Byron. Any questions for Byron? Yeah, yeah.
What months were you there?
Pardon me?
What month?
May.
I was there in May. Okay. Yeah.
What was the duration of your trip?
I was there for 5 days.
Okay.
How did you get your soft coral images?
That was at the Euclid Aquarium.
So you're shooting through glass.
Yeah.
Nice.
They have clear glass. They must clean it. They must clean their glass.
Yeah. Actually, it's a pretty neat aquarium, and they bill themselves as the only aquarium in the world that is a catch and release aquarium, in that everything that they bring in, they eventually release back into the ocean.
Cool.
That was right on the beach.
Okay, so that wasn't it.
That wasn't at the aquarium.
That was a good find there.
Yeah, because it was only about this big.
Very small. Yeah. Okay.
You got the picture before the seagulls got it. Yeah.
Great. All right.
And I used the rule of odds as well.
Yeah, I like there was the
scouting.
3. Yeah. I know. That's what I was thinking. Some of them I start counting. Yeah, and I noticed the one with the 3 plovers or shorebirds. Yeah. Sandpipers. Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay. Next up, we're going to hear from Denise, who's going to talk about her either favorite place or places. I need a microphone.
Don't start it yet. So I'm going to tell you a little about a bit about some of the places that I like to take photographs in southern Alberta. I'm probably best described as a nature photographer, but I do a little bit of client work as well. And I've done both types of photography in all the places that I'm going to show you today. Just some notes. If you want to go out to any of these places, there's campgrounds there, and you can spend multiple days there if you want. Or you can also, all the places are less than a 2-hour drive from Lethbridge. So you can easily do day trips as well. All the places that I'll show you, you can get to by car or by car and a very short walk. And if you want to look in more detail at any of the maps that are there, they're all available on the Alberta Parks website. So you can start it now. And so just a reminder that when you're out in these places, that they are home to wild animals. Yeah, go ahead and hit it. And when you're out photographing, then just remember to stick your head up every now and then and have a look around. So the first place I'll take you is out to Police Outpost. And out here, there's both a lake and a wetland. I usually come out here looking for birds and wildflowers, but there is definitely a bit of everything out here for sure. There's walking trails, and those trails are open all year long. The wetland, you can't go into the boggy bits of the wetland until after the 31st of July. There's trumpeter swans nesting out here, and they're really sensitive to humans. So I usually start coming out here probably April All the migratory birds are returning at this time. There's lots of activity. Everybody's really visible. They're going about, choosing their nesting sites and picking their mates. And then come May, things tend to get a little quieter while they're sitting on their eggs and hatching them out. But I would say mid-June all the way to the end of the year for sure, there's always something or somebody to photograph out here. Usually by then the baby birds the parents are willing to show you them as they teach them how to go about their lives. The baby mammals are coming out. And then mid-June into July, you start to get some really interesting skies out here with the thunderstorms and stuff of July and August rolling off the mountains and the winds that we get. There's some really interesting cloud formations. And starting probably mid-May and all the way to mid-September, if you're a flower photographer, you could probably come out here, I would say, every third week, and you'll have a whole different array of wildflowers to shoot. There's always something new, it seems. And then come August out here, it tends to get pretty warm and pretty hot, so the trail that goes around the lake is nicely shaded with the aspens, so that's a nice walk for sure. You can go over to the island, and just the pace of everything, like the animals and everything, are just kind of settled into their daily routines. There's lots of activity around for sure, and lots of things to photograph. If you like the sunrises, this probably isn't a great lake for you, but the sunsets can be pretty awesome for sure, especially if you get a little bit of wildfire smoke in the air like you see there. So that's later in the season. And then come the fall, the trumpeters are actually willing to show you their cygnets at this time. But you do still need a long lens if you want to get a photograph of them. They're still pretty shy. And usually in the fall, the bigger animals are coming out and a little more visible. They're out looking for their mates now. And then once all the birds have flown, there is an old homestead out here that you can have some fun playing with. And then Chief Mountain Highway, I think, is one of the most underappreciated, underused places in Waterton. And it's a great place to go if you want to spend an afternoon away from all the big crowds. This bear family is just hours out of their den, and these little cubs were hilarious. I don't think they knew what their legs were for. And they were tripping and falling, and it was really fun. And I've done some client work out here. So these were that couple. They had all their wedding formals taken on the banks of the Belly River, which was kind of fun and kind of nice. And then mid-July, if you want to take a drive, start at the beginning of the Chief Mountain Highway and drive slowly up to the Two Flags Overlook. And scan the ditches as you go. They're right full of wildflowers, and you can get some really nice photos in there for sure. And then the Sofa Mountain burn that went through in 1998 is actually regenerating pretty nice now. And there's some nice photos in there. And if you carry on up towards the border more, you come to a stand of mixed forest, and it's not been burned, so you get nice tall fall foliage, and you get some really pretty photos in there. And you never know who's going to stop by for a photo op as you're driving up and down the road. So the next place we'll go is just out to Beauvais Lake, and you can access this park 4 seasons, no problem. The roads are always plowed because there's people that live out here all year long. And there is an extensive trail network, and you can put together short, easy walks if you want, or full-day hikes if you want. I tend to come out here more in the winter and in the spring and the fall. It's a really nice place for families to camp, so the summer tends to be really, really busy. And when I come out here, I'm usually looking for landscapes, but I mean, there are mammals and, flowers and that kind of stuff too. And the sunrises over the lake are often really, really pretty. And if you do decide to go for a walk, you're going to travel through mixed forest or out on the open grassy slopes. And if you want to climb, there are 3 high points in the park. This is 2 of them, actually. You're looking at Mount Albert, and I'm standing on Mount Baldy. And Baldy's easier to access for sure. And from there, you can look out into the prairies, out into the Crow's Nest Pass, and into Castle Park. And if you like to photograph old homesteads, there's 4 sites in this park, and they're all marked on the map for you, so they're really easy to find. And these guys were pretty smart. They built pretty close to the lake, so it's usually not too hard to get to the sites. And then, of course, there's the fall foliage. Nice aspen, a variety of different grasses, and lots of really colorful little shrubs. And then the last place I want to take you is out to Castle Park. And since they made this a park and they put in really severe restrictions on off-road vehicles, this park has been actually quite quiet. And there is no end of opportunities for photography out here for sure. When I come out, I usually camp at the Beaver Mines Lake Campground, and you can spend the entire day just photographing in the campground. You can get some nice sunrises, you can get some nice sunsets there. The light on the lake in the morning is often really gentle and pretty. And if you like landscapes, of course, Table Mountain is pretty easy to find when you're out there. And then from the different campground loops, you can look down the South Castle Valley if you want to and take some photos of those mountains. You can also see across to the Syncline area and get some nice photos there. And then if you're tired of taking nature photos, there's a nice gravelly beach there, and it's got some nice props and also a boat dock too. And you can use that for people photography if you're so inclined. And then in the evening, again, the light around the lake is actually pretty nice again. And you can get some great stuff there. And you really need to take a drive down the South Castle Valley Trail. You will need a vehicle with a bit of clearance on it, but an SUV has no problem getting down there. And if you park at that blockade and then walk another 1.5 kilometers down the road, it's an easy walk, you get to this place where the South Castle River comes right next to the road, and there's a nice rock slide there. There's a mixed forest. The river is nice and calm here. So this is a really pretty place to come. And if you come in the fall, it's absolutely stunning. And then if you want to take a drive over to the Castle Falls campground, you're likely to pass some wildflower fields. And when you get to the campground itself, this is the Castle River, and there is 2 spots right in the campground where you can photograph the falls. And this photo and the next photo just show the difference between the seasons. Those were taken in the same spot. So there's definitely spring runoff to consider. And then you can take a drive down the Lost Creek Road into the fire of 2003, or get some pictures of the Continental Divide. Or if you want to take a ride down the Carbondale Road, you can access Lynx Creek from there. And it has some really pretty spots along that as well. And that's actually all the time I have to talk. Any questions?
Do you tent?
No. I have an RV that I stay in.
That was, yeah. Boy, I think with these segments, my list of places to visit this summer is just getting longer and longer. I don't think the summer is going to be long enough for all the places I want to go now. All right, time for our break. So we'll start up again in 15, 20 minutes.